And some of the videos we've already published related to the video we're doing today on substance abuse recovery using reauthorization as a spiritual practice. We have several videos that might be helpful, and these can be found on the channel on YouTube. So let's take a look at some statistics here from the CDC. U.S. overdose deaths up 15% in 2021 from 2020, which is a significant increase, but only half of the increase between 2019 and 2020 when deaths rose by 30%, which is crazy numbers. Still, almost 81,000 people lost their lives to opioid-involved drug overdoses just in 2021. It's more than all of the people who were killed in Korea in our war there, and also in the Vietnam War. Just from synthetic opioids, primarily fentanyl, we're talking about death numbers rising by over 22%. Psychostimulants like methamphetamine up by almost 34%, a third as many. Cocaine up by 28%. Biggest state increase percentage-wise was Alaska, up 75% year over year. Maine, where I live, is up 23% year over year, and we think we have a problem, and we do, but some other places have real problems with this issue. And again, Alaska and Maine, both up. Some of the categories, the drug types, you see synthetic opioids again, primarily fentanyl, psychostimulants, cocaine. And then the last category, which seems pretty much the same level between 2020 and 2021, were the opiates, opioids. If you go to opium.org, you can see the descriptions and definitions for each of these categories. For natural, we're talking about opiates. These things are derived from poppy plants, occur in nature. Opium, morphine, codeine. The semi-synthetics, these are actually opioids, not opiates. They're kind of half natural, derived or synthesized from opiates and opioids combined. Things like oxycodone, hydrocodone, buprenorphine, or the MAT medication for opioid addiction. Heroin, those are all semi-synthetic. And synthetic would be things that are created in a lab. Again, this would be basically things like fentanyl, but that's not in that category at the bottom. But still, when you look at it, it's a lot of folks that have died from overdose deaths in the last couple of years. And not coincidentally, I don't believe, it's the period for right in the heart of COVID-19. And a lot of folks, very stressed, used drugs to cope with what was going on. Lockdowns, fear of getting sick, fear of family members getting sick and dying. Just trying to provide for ourselves, make sure we had what we needed. Very stressful. And in terms of the response to COVID, Alaska came in a survey, came in rated 33rd in the country, which is bottom half. Maine actually was in the top 10 in terms of their ranking for how we handled COVID here. So maybe that has something to do with the overdose numbers. I'm not really sure. And this slide shows some of the national helpline numbers for SAMHSA, the National Institutes of Health, National Institute on Drug Abuse, and there's a lifeline number for an emergency for suicide and crisis. But in an emergency, still call 911. Albert Einstein said, in the middle of every difficulty lies opportunity. So even in the midst of drug addiction, we have the opportunity to make changes in life, Well, first we have to recognize those needs for change. And then spiritual recovery is about looking inside myself and rediscovering my self-spirit, my soul, during and after experiencing a significant life challenge or crisis, and using it, that self-spirit, that soul, to help me change, grow, and improve the quality of my connections to the all of life so I can reach my full potential and be the highest and best version of myself. Another great philosopher, Confucius, Master Kung, said that heaven's purpose is contained in our nature. What he's talking about is ascension, and that's the path to self-actualization or reaching our highest potential as spiritual human beings. After learning about spirit and what spirit means to us as human beings, we teach others to help the whole human race to ascend to its highest potential as a species. Ascension is the upward path to understanding the wisdom of spirit, the path to knowledge and to knowing spirit within us, and to happiness. On the other hand, descension is the downward path of ignoring the wisdom of spirit and the path to ignorance of spirit within us and to unhappiness. Now, unfortunately, there's a large gray area between the two, and sometimes we get lost there. So to get back to Confucius, we all have spirit as our essence, the center of our being. So since spirit is all-knowing and perfect, then our essential spirit knows the truth of life, the wisdom of spirit. Spirit knows itself. We have that truth contained within our DNA. We're here to have the human experience and at the same time, through our own will, our intention, to bring our humanness, or our nature, as Confucius put it, into alignment and harmony with spirit and the divine will. In that way, we fulfill our own purpose as well as heaven's purpose. So what is spirit's will for us as humans? Our spirit knows what its will is. It wants us to see the divinity in each other and to love each other. So what is love and how do we love each other? Basics would be to be respectful, honest, patient, caring, accepting, tolerant, forgiving, compassionate, empathetic, and also being grateful for each other, having faith and trust in each other. So reauthorization as spiritual practice in substance abuse recovery. So reauthorization as a spiritual principle or spiritual recovery practice is the process of empowering oneself again and taking ownership for one's words and deeds. And it's described by this: I am responsible and accountable for my feelings, thoughts, beliefs, and actions, and their effects on myself and others. So reauthorization is again giving oneself the power to originate and create, or in terms of one's own life, to author the plan for beginning to change and recreate that life. And reauthorization is related to recovery in that one regains or reclaims the power to take charge of her or his own life again. That's empowerment, to once again take ownership for one's life. And this begins with imagination, folks. We have to be able to imagine a better life. And to imagine the one that we're living now isn't the one that is our best and serves our highest needs. Abraham Maslow in the 1940s talked about self-actualization as becoming everything one is capable of becoming. The old Army slogan, be all you can be. And that's that full realization of one's potential. In the 1950s, 1960s, Carl Rogers took that a little bit further and described self-actualization as the ongoing development of self-concept formed through relationships with significant others. So that's where spirituality comes in, that spiritual connection. Carl Rogers thought that we developed ourselves through relationships with other people. And that process was about reflection or thinking about ourselves, reinterpretation of our experience, taking a look at what we've been through, seeing it for what it was, maybe looking at it again and seeing if there's some different interpretation that we can make, and then allowing ourselves to recover, develop, change, and grow. So Carl Rogers seems to have a definition for self-actualization that works pretty well with what we've been talking about with these 9 principles of spiritual recovery. So another caution here about spiritual recovery. Some protective factors in recovery. Things like healthy, mutually desired relationships with other persons, either individually or within group settings. What you might call the right people. I've said over and over again I was going to write a book called The Wrong People, but when it comes to this deal in recovery, we want the right people around us. And speaking of around us, we need healthy environments. And if we have to make changes to get into those healthy environments, we have to do that. What we might call right places. Sensing a theme here, folks. And then the plans for change and growth. And those would be the right things. So we're looking for those 3 protective factors in recovery. They'll go a long way to helping us be successful. The right people, right places, right things. Now, in my opinion, the same stressful people who can cause us stress to the point where we develop mental health issues and then addictions to try to cope with them are the same stressful people who cause us to relapse after a period of recovery success. In spiritual recovery, even though we change and grow through relationships with other people, we learn to more and more rely on ourselves to determine how our lives go and turn out. We learn to depend on ourselves and not others, maybe for the first time in our lives, even as we ask for and accept help from others when we need it. We develop a sense of community and service to others, which are also protective of recovery. The key to recovery success is to build healthy, whatever healthy looks like, relationships with others within a healthy environment and a plan for change and growth toward living up to our potentials and recognizing or creating opportunities to do so. Now, of everything that I've come across when it comes to recovery, for me, the number one protective factor in recovery is self-confidence. And self-confidence comes from a person empowering her or himself to take an honest look at her or his life and recognize any need to change or grow to cope with her or his life stressors in healthy ways. Self-confidence comes through recovery. We start to get the idea that we can take care of the small things and the big things in life, and we can cope with our stressors. And that helps us go a long way in recovery. So to use reauthorization as a spiritual practice, we need to recognize that need to change. If we're having problems in life, we're having stressors that are taking us off track and just taking a lot of our time, our energy, our resources, and we never seem to be making any progress. It's probably time to change. We need hope that things will get better. Sometimes we don't have much hope. We just have a little bit that says, hey, I know this needs to go in a different direction. I hope it can. I hope things can get better. We also need faith and spirit to help us along our process. we sometimes have trouble seeing that within us. And so we just have to know that it's there, that creative energy, that creative force is there in us to help us along. And we need to have that belief in our freedom to create our own life plan. We have to believe that we're responsible, we own it, and nobody else is going to swoop in and save us from ourselves. As Buddha said, work out your own salvation with diligence. So, save yourself, folks. So even Hansel and Gretel know, with addiction, the way in is also the way out. Now, addiction is addiction is addiction. The process of becoming addicted to something is usually a more important factor in recovery from the addiction than the form of the addiction itself, except for cases where the lethality of the drugs used is a particular concern, say in the case of an addiction to fentanyl, heroin, things like that, benzos, even alcohol. Those are the things that can kind of take you out through withdrawal and through accidental overdose. So when it comes to the road to recovery, it's going to look a lot like the road to addiction, only in reverse. So the things that got you to addiction, probably the best things to focus on in recovery. So if you have a genetic predisposition to addiction, say family history, that's something to focus on. Your environmental influences, socioeconomic conditions, family dynamics, those kinds of things, economic opportunities. And then drug use history, how someone's used substances to cope with their life stressors, for how long that's been going on and at what levels. So kind of the first question to ask when it comes to addiction recovery and using reauthorization as a spiritual practice, you want to ask the question, how did I get here? How did I get addicted to begin with? And there are a couple of ideas that I've seen floated that were kind of interesting to me. And those were the concepts of existential exhaustion and existential crisis. This website, calmsage.com, has some pretty nice mental health related articles, and they talk about that concept of existential exhaustion. Talk about that being the tiredness that you experience right before you slide into what they call an existential crisis. And that they talk about being the feelings and questions we experience and wonder about our life's meaning and purpose. When you can't find the answers you seek, it can leave you feeling stuck and not being able to understand how or which way to go in life, hence causing negative emotions. The negative emotions lead, as we know, to negative thoughts and thinking patterns, and we end up in big trouble. And especially with addiction, this exhaustion, this type of a crisis can lead us down the rabbit hole pretty fast. It's like Everett says, everyone's looking for answers. So it's going to seem kind of circular, but here goes. The root cause of drug addiction is stress. We have this feeling that we don't like, we feel uncomfortable, and so we take something to try to get rid of it. Stress is a stressor. Okay, a stressor is any kind of influence on our lives that produces that feeling of stress, or that reaction to some sort of a threat, pressure, demand, problem, trauma, those kinds of things. Stressors are also the main effects of drug addiction, and in turn cause the stress that people experience as a result of the addiction. So stress and stressors, they're both causes, they're both effects. It's just a big old circle. People use drugs to try to cope with the stressors or interfere in that cycle, but the drug use ends up causing more stress to try to cope with. So you never really catch up with yourself. The dog never does quite catch its tail. So even though folks that are struggling with substance abuse or drug addiction are mega stressed and have real problems to deal with, they tend not to change. They fail to recognize the need for change until the life is really out of control and the losses are piling up. And at that point, they have a really difficult time figuring out how to even start. They stay addicted to drugs even when those addictions are producing severe negative consequences, one right after the other. They feel compelled to use because that's the only coping mechanism they have. And they avoid making any significant changes in their lives because that change brings on stress, more stress, and discomfort, and then they tend to use more drugs or use drugs more often to cope with those stressors. So talk again about spirituality. This is connections, interconnections, reconnections, relationships within the all of creation, the universe, spirit, one absolute reality, whatever you want to call it, infinite intelligence, God. Spirituality is also about recovering a lost sense of connection, or one's spirit essence. That requires empowerment, or recovering the personal power that may have been lost or taken away, or even given away, or purposely forgotten. This separation or this disconnection, this feeling of being disconnected when folks are addicted to drugs, it's a deception. We are made of spirit energy. We're held in our exoskeleton or our skin. That's what separates us. It's not like we're actually discrete from each other. We're all of that spirit energy and are interconnected and always will be. Even after we pass from this human form to spirit form, we're still connected. So the spiritual crisis, we talked about the existential crisis earlier. This is a perceived disconnection from everyone and everything. Again, because the disconnection is not real. This, though, is a feeling, though, of nearly total isolation. Person feels like they're hitting rock bottom, and really the path to recovery begins with some sort of a spiritual awakening or understanding that we're better than the way we're treating ourselves and the way we're living, and a development of an awareness of that reality. And in spiritual recovery, power, as we talk about it, is the ability to move in a positive and healthy life direction when most folks' preference is to stay right where they are, even if that's an unhealthy place. People resist change. We hear change is the only constant, all of that kind of stuff. The reality is people really don't like changing. It takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of effort, and it's not always guaranteed. Now, stress and negativity fuel disempowerment, and that is a process that leads people to believe they have no power to change their life for the better, so they have no hope. They don't believe that problems can be solved, so they don't have much faith or confidence, and that things will never improve for them. Again, lack of hope. That disempowerment basically says, I don't have the ability to change my life. And that's kind of a dangerous philosophy for folks to live by, the I'm powerless over XYZ kind of philosophy. I think it's, my opinion, harmful to folks who are trying to recover from drug addiction, and I think it actually ends up causing more problems than that philosophy could ever cure. So this is when you hear things like, I'm powerless over whatever my addiction is. It's hopeless. I'll never be able to do anything about it. It's never going to get better. And that sense of learned helplessness, or just kind of over time through experience, just not being able to do anything to help yourself out. But again, in my opinion, the truth is recovery is possible. It's at least a 50-50 shot. It's an even chance. And recovery is probable. If you do the right things, the right effort, as they say in Buddhism, then you got probably a better than 50-50 chance. And some folks, recent studies suggesting folks who are diligent, vigilant, do the right things, end up 3 out of 4 times being able to stay on the recovery road. So that's good news for folks. So thank you for watching this video of the 9 principles of spiritual recovery. If you found anything in here that was inspirational, educational, enlightening, please consider hitting the like button. Subscribe to the channel if you'd like. Sign up for notifications. Share the video with anybody who you think might get something out of it. And as always, feel free to leave something in the comments section. And we will see you all next time. Thanks again, and take care.